Hey, welcome back to another Reaper blog Q&A session. I've got a lot of great questions coming in from the community this week. Before we get started, got to thank you all for participating in that Black Friday sale. It was a huge success. Thank you guys so much. And I also want to thank my patrons. They really help keep the Reaper blog running. Their support every month means the world to me. If you want to be a patron, you can get some exclusive content like the Patron Show. For the past 31 weeks, I've been putting out an extra sort of episode, kind of a grab bag of interesting things that I find throughout the week and news about the Reaper blog and what I'm working on and all that kind of behind the scenes stuff as well. All right, so first question comes from Carlos. Could you explain how you made the ending track of your vids, please? I've been trying to make a similar sound, Carpenter Brut style, without success, and I've tried everything. All right, so let's take a look at this Carpenter Brut style beat. I made this a few years ago. I don't think I ever intended to do much with it, but it ended up being the outro loop. So here's what we got. Anyone that's watched to the end of my videos will probably know that one. But there's really not a lot going on here. So let's start with the drums. Drums on their own sound like this. So it sort of has like a bit of a crunch, kind of a retro drum machine, kind of, grimy sort of sound. The kick and snare come from a loop pack. It's deadmau5 style kicks and snares. They came from the company Loopport, but I don't think they're around anymore. It's not really anything special. You can get that sound in other means. It's like a deep kick that has a very clear attack. And like a very wet, hard, compressed snare. And then I've got vintage drum machine samples on top of that because Carpenter Brut uses a lot of sort of like TR-505 and 707 sounds. Just one shots, no automation, no volume changes, just, not really anything going on there. And these hi-hats, they are alternating left and right on every 16th. So there's a bit of a volume difference here, I think. Oh, not even, just panning. There's just a quick, lazy way of doing auto panning. For drum processing, I'm using soft clipping on the loop. I'm using EQ, again, soft clipping, limiting these to -3. The snare loop has some stuff going on it, a bit of a high shelf. I'm compressing it and I'm soft limiting it. Without effects, sounds like this. Without the reverb, sounds like this. A very similar sort of thing with this other snare drum. If I solo it without reverb. And then all of those drums are going into wave shaping distortion, just giving it a little boost. And then EQ, just a little bit of bite around, what is that? 2.5K. But at this point, I should mention that it's also going through distortion and things on the master track. All the sounds are going through these two plugins on the mix bus. So here's how that looks. Nothing too extreme on that really, but it's an important part of it. So here's the first bass. If we look at the MIDI programming, you can see that there's not much going on. It's a G. The plugin is a free virtual instrument. And I think as I was building up this, I started with a wave shaping distortion to give it some bite. Ended up being off in the actual mix. So I knew that distortion was a big part of the sound. So I was kind of like getting the bass sound through this and then used a different distortion in the end. Then I've got left and right synths. Again, basically doing the same thing on the synths. So this is an octave up. And then one on the right side. So all three synths together. And then I've got EQ, devil-loc deluxe. This is where a lot of the tone comes from. And then the whole thing is ducked on every kick and snare. And there's really no way of balancing that volume difference there. So a lot of the grit comes from running everything through devil-loc. And this is one of those effects where the level going into it really makes a difference. If I change this mix, the distortion reacts completely differently. There's not a lot going on here, and I wish there was more. There's more like lessons to learn from this. So that's what it went into my version, my take on his style. There's a couple of other things that I would recommend you check out. Gardner Sound did a how to make series video on Carpenter Brut. I think it's really interesting. He tried to recreate Turbo Killer, did a pretty good job. He was using Ableton Live, but you know, the ideas can be applicable anywhere. There's also a great video from Alex Bell on how to get the sound or how to get a song that's similar to Justice. Justice is a big influence on Carpenter Brut. The way you would arrange a full song in the style of Justice would actually apply to how you would produce like Carpenter Brut. So yeah, check those out. Links in the description. The next question comes from Brad. In one of your tutorials, you briefly mentioned a custom toolbar button that gives you a fast edit mode. I'd be interested in getting a better look at the custom action associated with this. Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's actually really simple. It's basically just changing mouse modifiers. I'll show you now. So let's look at fast edit mode in my toolbar. That's this button here. What this is actually doing is changing various mouse modifiers. And I don't use this with a left click. I actually right click it to arm it. So every time I click it, it runs this action. So I click once and it splits. If I drag on the bottom, it slides around. If I drag on the top, it moves the item. So it's just changing various mouse modifiers. Really simple action. And I have another button that sets my mouse modifiers back to normal. So let's look at that custom action. I'm using SWS AW split selected items at edit cursor with crossfade on left. Options enable crossfade on split, and options enable auto crossfades. Then disable snapping and set the default mouse modifier action for media item bottom half left drag to move item contents ignoring snap, which is the same as if you're holding Alt and you drag. In this case, it's only going to work on the lower half of the item. It's also doing media item fade intersection left drag to move both fades ignoring snap. And I don't recall why I had that section of the custom action in there, but there must have been some reason. So for example, if I'm making a split, normally it puts the fade on the right side, but if I'm in fast edit mode and I just click, it's going to put a fade on the left side. And for drum editing, that's going to preserve the transients much better than the original. Charlie K asks, is there a shortcut or how would I do a custom action to make a new child track? I'd like to make a new track, but have it be the child of the currently selected track. There's actually a couple actions here that I think are very relevant to this, not exactly what you're asking for. The one that I use very frequently is me2beats, create folder from selected tracks, and rename folder. That's going to put a new track above it and then ask you for a name. And there's another very similar one from Locasana, create folder to contain selected tracks. And again, that's putting a folder above the selected tracks. You can get both of these scripts in the repack extension. And to do this the other way, where you're putting a track below the selected track, but then making that a child track, let's have a look and see if we can make a custom action. In the custom action, we're going to be using these set folder track states. I think we're going to need one that is set to parent and one that is set as last in folder. So let's make a new custom action. Let's call it new child track. And folder state, let's put in a last in folder and one parent. And let's do new track. We're going to do insert new track. All right, so as a starting point, let's see how that works. So going to select a track, going to run my action, new child track. I think that's it. Set the selected track's folder states to parent. We'll insert a new track. That track will automatically be selected, and we're going to set that one to last in folder. Jason A asks, how do you deal with guitar tracks that used multiple microphones? So for example, if you have 2 rhythm guitars that each have 2 mics, making a total of 4 tracks, how would you handle the panning and level on those? The reason I ask is because when I record next, I would like to use the traditional SM57 and some other mic to blend the sound. I don't know how to approach mixing them together. Yeah, this is a great question. So when I have 4 tracks and it's 2 separate performances, but it's 2 mics on each one, I treat the pair of mics as a mono source. You're very rarely going to get any usable stereo information from 2 mics on the same speaker. They're just not far enough apart. They're not different enough to get sort of a stereo image. So they're meant to be blended together in mono. And so when I'm recording, I do that through the gain control on the mic. So I keep the faders at the same level, but then I'll adjust the gain of the second mic until it blends really well with the first mic. But if it's in a mix, you just control the 2 levels, find a good balance in mono. You can use the grouping function in Reaper so that those 2 fader levels are locked to each other. And then I pan those left. Repeat the process for the guitar on the right side. And then you balance the 2 levels between the 2 different performances. I'm not sure if I ever showed this in a video, but you can definitely take 2 mics and sum it down into a single track. In Reaper, there's this option of forcing a mono recording. And so that's what I do. Once I have that balance right at the microphones and at the preamps, then I just commit it to a single track. But if you're new to this, definitely record on 2 tracks and find the right balance. And once you're more comfortable with it, try that summing option. A lot of people will actually take their preamps into a little mixer and then sum that down to mono and then send that into the DAW, through a line level. And that's how they handle this mono summing nonsense. You mentioned the SM57, so yeah, I've got one. Absolutely great mic for electric guitars. What I found to be the best blend is actually a sort of a clone of a SM57, the GLS ES57. This one's monoed a little bit. I took out some of the foam that was up here, and there's also a resistor in here to kind of change the impedance. They're kind of similar sounding mics, but together they have more texture. There's more bass, there's more bite. Just the 2 mics combined make one sound, and it is bigger and better than either of the mics alone. Both of them kind of sound thin or nasally, and when you put them together, it actually sounds real good. I'm probably not going to put in an example of this in the video, but you'll have to take my word for it. This $20 mic is not great on its own, but paired with the SM57 works fantastic. Last question comes from Squidman6000. What is the most common thing that bands or artists do or have that help them succeed in the music industry? There's several things that you could say. You could say that they had a lot of money to start with to get them going with marketing, or you could say that they just have great songs or whatever it is. What I'm going to say is that they have a consistent brand, they have a consistent image, and that image works well with the music that they make. So it's a complete story. There's actually a really good podcast episode that I listened to recently from the 6 Figure Home Studio podcast, episode 106, How to Level Up from Small Gigs to Massive Projects with Brandon Reich of Tension Division. I'll have a link in the description to that. It's actually a really interesting podcast. And I think that having a unified image, an image that inspires the community, is actually one of the most important things that a band can have. So that's it for the Q&A episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my patrons. Thanks to everyone that has been watching the videos, for sharing, liking, all that stuff. Really means a lot. I want to thank my top patrons: Mark Kilborn, Gerald Sema, John Mark Giffen, David Jelema, Igor Igorkin, Futari Media, Luca Fusi, Matt Kirchhoff, Small Systems, John Swihart, Brian Hilliard, and Glenn Kiefer. Thank you guys so much. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter, support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.